You'll get to see what your peers are working on. So please attend that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we can be a little bit more ceremonious because this isn't just the last seminar of this year. This will be the last seminar in this building ever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, aside from y'all with you next week, but
Last speaker.
the exclamation mark of our seminar series in Lohansky Hall is Dr. Mark Scott. Welcome. Thank you. So I'll try to give my best. We didn't rehearse this, so I'll try to give my best history of Mark. So Mark is South Carolina native from North Augusta. Fish biologist from day one. A lot of the streams that Mark grew up messing around in are now important data points in our history of conservation of freshwater fish in the state. Went to undergrad just up the road at Wofford, right? Master's at Virginia Tech. Worked in Maryland, somewhere in between, right? Right after. And then a PhD and postdoc at the University of Georgia. And there are many of you, at least fish folks, might just kind of casually and flippantly cite Scott and Help in 2001, just like it's a Bible verse or something like that. Well, this is where it comes from. So like very seminal work that has led to our understanding of land use change in this Appalachian region that many of us now working on Western North Carolina, the Upper Tennessee River Basin, will be building on maybe some of those exact same sites. And Mark's been the freshwater fisheries. Well, I guess, what is your official title?
I lead the statewide research program for freshwater fisheries.
Right. In South Carolina since 2003. And that time has really taken this program here in the state in terms of getting data and doing conservation science on the freshwater resources of this state into the modern era in terms of research, applied conservation focused research. And so specifically, I mean, just about everything that I've done since I've been here at Clemson has been in conjunction in some way, shape, or form with Mark and Mark's team. So Mark has been a very foundational cornerstone of everything that we put together here in this last decade. And so I imagine here that you'll be able to see a lot of that in action and take it away.
Thank you very much for that. I do want to give a shout out to my team, referred to as the Stream Team for South Carolina. And Clemson has graciously allowed us to use the Cherry Farm, the Aquatic Research Lab, for housing our folks over there, equipment. So feel free to drop in and meet those folks. They're real professionals, and it's a great place for cross-pollination on aquatic science. So jumping right into it, sustainability really is at the bedrock of the work that I've been trying to do over the years. And it's essentially us meeting our present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And I think it's probably the most critical challenge facing society today. My little corner of this effort is focused on native fishes, in particular the Southeast, and those habitats on which they depend. As Brandon mentioned, I started in 2003, and right off the bat, part of my charge from within DNR is to coordinate and collaborate with Clemson researchers to try to build research that can be applied to conservation and management of our aquatic resources in South Carolina. Brandon's been by far the most productive of the folks that I've worked with, working with Luke Bauer. Colby Dennison has been instrumental in our work on several projects. Previously, folks in this department, Yoichiro Kano, Sam Esquine, working with Chris Post, Rocky English, if anyone remembers that name, and Jeremy Pike, I think now is with Extension, an invertebrate and geomorphic guy. Steve Claney and Peter Vandenberg are toxicologists, were toxicologists in biosci, and then Liz Caraway is a chemist in bioengineering that we worked with over the course of the years. So my impetus and real focus is on the richness of the Southeast, who lives where and why. And so that leads me to the aquatic habitat focus that I've really taken on. And so with this diversity also brings a high level of imperilment amongst different taxa, particularly mussels, crayfishes, and fishes as well. Of course, as a member of the Natural Resource Agency of South Carolina, this is our purview to make sure that these things persist. So that's really the basis for what we're doing. And there's a lot of urgency to this. If you look at a group of taxa and their imperilment, you see that freshwater taxa end up being quite a large proportion of this. Freshwater snails, mussels, crayfish are the top three. We've got shrimps. These are the aquatic insects that are sensitive, amphibians, and then freshwater and anemones fishes. So almost all of the top tier of imperilment is related to freshwater habitats in some way. And so the way that I think about aquatic habitats, and of course in the Southeast, running waters are the natural aquatic habitat. All of the lakes in South Carolina are impounded rivers. There are no natural lakes, and that's true of most states in the Southeast, although there are some, not including Florida, which has natural lakes. But when you think about entire landscapes can be subdivided into these drainage areas that all abut each other, that's the terrestrial connection to the aquatics. It's runoff. And so the entire landscape can be managed for aquatics using watershed as a unit. Watersheds are scalable in that the different subbasins build upon each other in a continuum, and water flows from one subbasin, joins another at a confluence and forms a larger stream. Larger streams form rivers all the way to the Mississippi and then end up in the ocean, obviously. But this connection between the upslope is really what drives the aquatic habitat relationship. So the water is carrying sediment, it's carrying organic matter, and so those drive the ecosystem within these running waters. The connectivity, of course, with gravities from upslope down, and from headwaters down to the rivers and the ocean. And so the concept of cumulative effects is very important here, because whatever is happening anywhere along this continuum is integrating that whole area upstream that is delivering that water and materials, sediment, organic matter, and whatever contaminants there might be in there. And so when this connectivity gets disrupted various ways, it can be a culvert all the way to a giant dam like we have here in Hartwell, that's interrupted. And so that impacts the critters that are trying to live there. And so a little bit of terminology, there's some interchangeability between the term watershed, a catchment, or a drainage or a basin. Basin usually is a scaled larger. People tend to talk about river basins. And then catchments tend to be these smaller sub-basins, but it's not a hard and fast rule. So when we think about the condition of the watershed, these landscape patterns in terms of what land cover is and what uses there are within these watersheds becomes very important. And we can see here, this is the South Atlantic slope. It's part of a project we're working on with North Carolina. And this is the study area for that. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But you can see the extent to which the green has been supplanted by various human uses, urban and agricultural, residential, and so forth. A lot of transformation there that has a lot of consequences. There was a song that Joni Mitchell wrote called Big Yellow Taxi back in 1970, back when the environmental movement was just getting started. If you never heard Joni Mitchell, you should look it up. She pointed out the obvious. Lots of consequences for our waterways when we change the native forest cover that regulates hydrology, sediment delivery, organic matter delivery. And you get, unstable banks. You have a lot of sediment delivered to the channel. You have urban runoff, which can include contaminants and nutrients. You have agricultural, what we call deserts here. There's absolutely no structure for anything to hide or to support forage. And there tend to be very, very few critters living in streams like that. And so basically what happens is the patterns that have occurred, the functions that have occurred over evolutionary and geologic time are undone. So the conditions to which the organisms are adapted are shifted. And this is essentially the cause of our biodiversity crisis. This is the cause for imperilment. When we change that landscape and alter hydrology, it becomes unstable, sedimentation rates go way up, and that causes these fine deposits into the substrate and smother the coarser particles, and also the water column is carrying these suspended sediment particles that interfere with feeding and oftentimes with respiration. And so that unstable hydrology leads directly to unstable channels, like we saw a picture of there. Temperature regimes generally are increased in temperature on average, and then the variability also goes up. We lose organic matter inputs, which generally drive a loaded system, ecosystems, the energy sources. Dissolved nutrients tend to go up, and contaminants tend to go up. And then you have fragmentation from those barriers that I mentioned earlier, which reduces gene flow and migratory pathways. And so, when we think about these threats and how, this is turning out, it can be, kind of depressing. I find students often, when I get through this portion of the aquatic habitat class I teach, end up saying, well, what's the point? Why are we even it's too late? We're seeing loss of our services, loss of species. Now we've got climate change piling on. And I'm just pointing out that these systems, because they are running water, they are highly dynamic and the organisms are adapted to that dynamism. So they are pre-adapted to change and alteration and catastrophe. So they're extremely resilient. They're resistant to change and they quickly respond post acute impacts. And so in our work across South Carolina, we're finding that many places are intact with endemic fish that evolved here and they're persisting. So it is worth our attention trying to maintain. And that's what we're trying to do with our programs. This was a paper that came out in 2020. This was when the Convention on Biological Diversity was to be reviewed in 2021. This paper came out in 2020. And, you know, this is exactly what we want to achieve, to, address the sustainable development goal that the UN just put into place and sort of bend this trajectory from this imperilment and moving it back up toward where it needs to be. If we do business as usual, we'll continue this trajectory, which is not where I want to see it go. And so they had a number of recommendations to achieve this. And so what we're hoping to put into place here should contribute to that. So we're trying to move from a reactive conservation, which has been the norm in natural resource management, and move into a proactive realm. We don't want to wait until species are on the brink to try to put in a recovery plan. It's like, let's not let them get there. Let's not try to take dams out and try to fix culverts. Let's do it right the first time. Restoration has been pretty much shown not to be as effective as protection. And what it is a lot of money spent without a lot of bang for the buck. Protect system integrity in the first place. We need to have decisions that give us more conservation for the resources being spent. And the motto of the state wildlife grants that are based on every state's state wildlife action plan is to keep these common species common. Don't let them get imperiled. And so the foundation for this work is effective as well-designed natural resource assessments, standardized sampling, rigorous data analysis of those data, trying to relate species persistence and distribution to the habitat conditions and watershed conditions that they're related to, and use this information to inform our conservation. So this brings me to the South Carolina Stream Assessment, which we implemented beginning in 2005, and it's been ongoing more or less ever since. We're up to about 1,000 sites across the state in every river basin and every ecoregion. This you can't make out real well, but the ecoregions for South Carolina are the Blue Ridge right in the corner. Then you have the Piedmont that comes out to the Slate Belt. The fall line then shifts to the coastal plain. We have the sand hills, the Atlantic Southern Loam Plains, and then finally the Carolina Flatwoods or the outer coastal plain. And so you have this topographic template for fish assemblages. They respond very strongly to this. This is an elevational gradient. And so we have a standard set of operating procedures to sample every one of these sites. And as we use a backpack electrofishing, we use the same set of habitat assessment protocols, and we do our water quality the same way at every site so that we can compare sites. And so we end up with large data sets of site ID, which essentially links species to habitat to water quality and watershed conditions. And we can collate this species data in all sorts of different ways to look at our indications of what that habitat is like, who is where. So a paper that Colby spearheaded came out in 21. Looked at our species data for all these sites and discovered that we essentially have 4 classes of fish assemblages or types in South Carolina based on compositional similarity. And it reflects that upland and lowland very much. You can see the split is Blue Ridge and Piedmont. And then the next split is basin, because in the uplands, these basins have been isolated from each other. There's no gene flow across watershed boundaries, the basin boundaries. So you have speciation. There are sister species that occur in the savanna and in the Santee, PD. They've been isolated, speciated, and so that adds to our diversity. That's really the story of the Southeast altogether. The entire Southeast has this same characteristic. It's a little different on the coastal plain. They're very tied to hydrology because with that low relief, a lot of times there's mixing across basins. You have big flooding events and so forth. There's more gene flow that's been allowed. There's less what we call endemism, where they're isolated within a basin. So they're tied to what kind of hydrology they live in. If you get into the sandhills, intercoastal plain, these tend to be more stable, tied to groundwater. And so you have species that are prefer those flow types. And then you have this more intermittent hydrology that can be ephemeral. And they dewater during drought, they rewater when it floods, and this dynamic tends to drive that pattern. So in analyzing those data, and this is a random set of random forest plots. This is looking at our species of greatest conservation need, this fish that are in our state wildlife action plan, noted for being sensitive to habitat change. We're looking at likelihood that a site will have either low richness of the sensitive species, an intermediate, or a high richness. And so what we've done is plot that likelihood against forest cover on the x-axis here. And the main thing is you'll see that the more forest cover you are, the less likely to have low sensitive species richness. Conversely, to have high species richness of these sensitive species, you actually have almost a threshold type response. You need about 70% of the forest or more to support their life histories. When you don't have that much, they tend to drop off. And when you don't have at least 20%, they tend not to be there. So another way of looking at this idea was another study we did that was independent of the stream assessment. We worked with some geomorphologists in the Broad River about 10 years ago, and they did a lot of work with sediment, and in particular bed sediment, which is reflected here in the D50 as the median particle diameter on the bed of the stream. And so the bigger that is, the more likely you are to have these fish that are sediment sensitive. Now in suspended sediment, that's the stuff in the water column. The more of that you have, pretty quickly you have a threshold where they're not tolerant of high sediment concentrations. That's the fish. This is the EPT index, the Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, Trichoptera. Those are the sensitive insect species that were at this. And then you see the same thing. The more suspended sediment concentration, the less they like it and they drop out. There are fewer and fewer of these sensitive insects. Now, if we turn around and look at the dependency of sediment, like I mentioned earlier, on this forest cover, particle size is tightly related to forest cover. Notice again, a threshold that's very similar to the sensitive fish species. Suspended sediment concentration. It's high unless you come out here to a very similar threshold where it drops off, and that's supporting fish and macroinvertebrates. Here's a different set of data, independent. This is looking at the likelihood of an endemic bass, which is under threat from hybridization with an invasive congener. And what we looked at is how likely are you find pure Bartram's bass alleles here in the Savannah Basin. And if, in this case, on the left, we looked at canopy cover. And again, as a percentage, we're looking at a threshold that's about 75%. When Brandon's student, I believe that was Emily Judson's, looked at a different set of data from the same place, basically the same methods, but just different sites. There was a split using conditional inference tree that was very important at 75%. Less than 75%, you're less likely to find pure Bartram's bass. If you have more than 75% or an intact watershed with intact habitat, you're going to find more pure, intact populations of this endemic fish. The other things that are important is how close you are to the reservoir, which is where the invasive fish is manifested, and also channel grading. These are shoal-level fish. So basically, these independent data are suggesting that there's a threshold effect in watershed forest cover, and this provides a target for management. If we know we need this much to sustain our systems, then that's something you can plan for and shoot for and target in terms of restoration, recovery, and protection. And that's part of the proactive planning that we're talking about. It's scientifically defensible based on all of this information. So this moves into a current project. Our aquatic planning tool, this is the project I mentioned with North Carolina, and there's that project area again. Colby Dennison has been instrumental in getting this modeling work done. And it's closely coordinated with Brandon and Luke Bauer and with Esri and our GIS people. So that's where we're headed with this, is trying to map out these relationships to see where should we be doing work in terms of protection and restoration, and how much is needed to make an effect. So we're using our data to try to answer those questions. We got 67 freshwater fish species of greatest conservation need for North Carolina and South Carolina. Come straight from our two wildlife action plans. A lot of those obviously are in common. And so Colby's been doing a lot of species distribution modeling, and I appreciate you letting me use your slides. He's been doing ensemble models, which is basically like the weather forecasters do for hurricanes, and you can get some sense of this uncertainty and convergence. And so we're doing that in terms of species presence absence across the study area. And so spatial grain here is the National Hydrography data set. We have, each one has this little COM ID. We call it, it's the local catchment. And then associated with that is all of the area upstream that drains to that particular segment. And that's the larger watershed, or the network catchment, they call it. And so we assign land cover variables to all of these. And so we have all of our fish data associated associated with it. And then there are climate variables that have been associated with it as well from current projections. So to run future scenarios, that would provide us with current distributions. Now we're looking at scenarios for change. And so we have some future land cover projections we can model based on this, and then future climate as well. So I'm not going to get too heavily into this, but Bartram's bass is an example. You can see that the important variables were drainage area, slope, like I said, channel gradient, temperature, and then land use as well. And then here's a map of current probability of occurrence for Bartram's bass, and then the darker, the reds, the more likely they are to occur. I'm missing one. Anyway, that's the current situation. And then this is the planning tool. We're still working on the landing page here, but anyone can go to this. It's going to be a public facing page. You can go and click on, exploring current conditions for any of these SGCN that we're able to model, and then run those future scenarios to look at change as expected. Here's what I was looking for. So here's one of those future scenarios with climate. You can see that in 2100, and I think this is was this a medium?
That's more optimistic.
This was a more optimistic one. You can see the reduction of those reds and darker colors up into the headwaters. So the range reduction under a moderate climate change scenario is pretty alarming.
And that's the more severe one.
That's the high
Higher warming.
emission scenario. They're almost extirpated from their native range. Retreat to the Blue Ridge. So the other thing that we're working on, this is where we're currently kind of, I won't say bogged down, but this has given us a little more trouble. It allows a user to go in and do land use change. And so if a person saw that the local planning commission says we're going to have X% of development in our county, then you could go in and say, well, I'm interested in my backyard or whatever a project is being proposed. And this is a nice, the dark green means there's plenty of Bartram's bass, high probability of occurrence. But if this project went in and modified these two catchments, you could go in and change the values, then rerun the model, and then you can see that the likelihood of that fish occurring goes down, not only in the affected areas, but then downstream. See the change from the dark blue up. And so what this tool allows you to do is say, wow, that has an effect at that magnitude. You can play around with the magnitude of that change and see at what point would the effect not be manifested. The other thing you could do is say, what if they went in and did some mitigation and started restoring some of the others? What would it take to offset that impact? And you can play around with the spatial configuration of it as well as the magnitude, say, how little could we spend to do that given the resource constraints? Or what would it take for that person doing the impact to say, yeah, this is what you need to do to mitigate? So anyway, that's the idea for our planning tool. Help us communicate the findings of all of our data. Try to bring the society at large into understanding science-based decision-making and facilitate this proactive conservation. This approach can be expanded from beyond our study area currently. Across the Southeast, where Brandon's working with SARP, the Southeast Aquatic Resource Partnership, and then the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, possibly the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, on expanding this. we're looking at just these fish species SGCN, but this could be expanded to any taxa, those mussels, those crayfish, herps, whatever you were interested in. And then improve the spatial predictors over time. And then anyone that is tasked with sustainable development, be it local governments, state, federal agencies doing permitting, land management, NGOs, anyone interested in advocacy, and of course, educational institutions. So I'm going to wrap up and thank again my stream team, Kevin Kubok, Drew Delder, Rachel Moore, Clint Burton, Brooke Crawford, and then our Clemson collaborators. Sam Eswine basically was the brains behind getting this tool to work properly. He's used to work with Chris Post in this department. And there's a ton of other people I don't have room to mention, but U.S. and Fish and Wildlife Service has supported this through sport fish restoration, state wildlife grants, competitive state wildlife grants. We did get money from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and SARA this work. So again, I think sustainability is the most critical challenge of our time. The real difficulty, given all of this work and making data available and supporting decisions, is to generate the will of our people to take action. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Take any questions if we have time.
I have a question along the coastal plain. What are the biggest data gaps that you have that if you're like, I wish we had this kind of data and that would help out our predictions or our spatial coverage or relationships that we have between environment and fish presence, like this. So if you had a magic wand, what data would you add?
Groundwater connectivity. Maybe Catherine could elaborate, but to me, it's the hydrology there that we don't have good information on in terms of local variation, or spatial variation. We see fish responses that are kind of hidden to us, and so we're still scratching our head in many cases about why this looks that way, because it may not be related to the land use. It may or may not, but it's more complicated than just. In the upstate, it's easier. It's just that's a more straightforward relationship. But on the coastal plain, it is not. I would love to have a map of like where groundwater and surface water are connected.
I was just wondering, you said a lot of upstream effects trickle downstream. Have you ever seen the opposite effect where something like in a watershed downstream affected an upstream watershed of itself?
Well, I think that is mainly the barrier situation, connectivity, because you're impeding any gene flow from downstream to upstream. A lot of fish migrate, obviously. So that's the thing that strikes me the most is that's your downstream to upstream connectivity problems, just barriers. They can't get where they need to get, the spawning habitat or just to disperse. That's the real problem. But obviously, you know, due to gravity, everything's coming down. Sediment, organic matter, contaminants.
South Carolina has no natural lakes, and I just like around here there are all the reservoirs. Like I just think about, wow, this used to be a river, used to be like such a different system. But I just think about like looking at the reservoirs around here, like this used to be a river, like this used to be so different.
Exactly.
Now that we've like put in all these reservoirs, is there something that your work has informed like how we can manage them now that they're in place and so modified, like for to manage biodiversity or best practices?
There's there's something called the natural flow paradigm. And so if we can convince dam operators to try to take into account what the natural variability in flows would be for that system and try to bring some attempt at replicating that, that would go a long way to help. Because right now, they tend to just be focused on, like, for example, hydroelectric. They peak during the day, they pump everything at full because they're making money that way. And then at night, they tend to hold it back. So there's low flows. So it's very unnatural hydrograph there. So that would go a long way. And then we also, are keeping an eye out for opportunities to remove some dams. I don't think these big boys are going anywhere anytime soon. How they're operated would definitely help. Thank you.
The predictive future modeling is really interesting, and really great that it's public facing. Is the methodology used to create that predictive modeling published somewhere?
It will be.
Okay.
And each one of the models should have a PDF on the website where you can say, oh, I'm looking at Bartram's Bass. What exactly went down with that modeling? And you should be able to pull that PDF and say, here's the parameters, these are the error estimates and so forth.
Building off that question, as somebody who also wants to make a tool very similar to what y'all made, what are some critical steps and kind of what programs did you work in?
Once you have the database, we use R to do the modeling. Then there's a Python programming language that we use to have R communicate with the GIS. And so that's the sticking point right now. When I mentioned we're really struggling with the those custom scenarios. And so it's working the way we want. Like you saw, the map did work, but it's too slow. So we have to figure out a way to get this thing more efficient so that it's workable. So that to me it's also outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not a Python coder, so I'm officially college. So I have to rely on tech people. It's been challenging.
Given the importance of forested watersheds for fish communities, speaking to your last point here about socio-political will, what opportunities, institutions, policies you see, especially maybe here in the upstate, that can help keep forested watersheds forested?
Yeah, I mean, we have a constituency, right? I mean, there are people very concerned about quality of life in South Carolina. Our governor talks about it. So this is sort of like where the rubber meets the road. We're telling you how to maintain that quality of life. Then you have to make decisions. And we will see, right? But I think the more people are, motivated to know, I want my waterways to be healthy and swimmable and fishable, just like our Clean Water Act says, then we should hold our decision makers' feet to the fire. That's my personal opinion. That's easier said than done. That's part of the political process. It's like, what are the important issues that need to be addressed here? Yes.
What ways do you, and I guess your team, try to communicate with the public to get them to understand what they have here in South Carolina and, get them as excited about it as most of us are in here?
Yeah, I take that one. Well, we have social media folks with our agency, and we're constantly trying to get them to pay attention and feature our stuff. And they've been doing better. And I mean, our guys do a lot of outreach events. So they're pretty constant at trying to engage public, but at the same time, the people willing to come out to an outreach event are already interested. So the tough nut is, you know, I showed that slide about dystopian, you know, I'm just afraid of the people that are just live life through a screen and they're not outside and they're like, have already, like, it's too late and they're not paying attention. And so that's what I'm worried about. How do we engage those people? It's like, no, looking at a stream or a forest on a screen is not the same. It's tough one. But you guys are the next generation. This is turning into your, you know, sustainability is affecting you. I've given it a shot, but takes all of us. Take the baton.
Well, to build on that, to your last point again, so as students and university employees in this room, what do you think we can do to help generate that social lift?
Certainly vote. That's probably a number one. Make your voice heard through the polls and any outlet. You know, I'm sure a lot of you are on social media. I am not, but you know, just making those points and what's important to you and influence. You're an influencer, right? I'm open to suggestions. I'm not really a tech social media guy, but heck, we're trying to make this stuff available and I'd love to see people use it. It comes down to, you know, people paying attention and creating a buzz. What's the word? Go viral, you know. I think if people will use it, help make decisions that are, you know, cost effective and effective, and I would be extremely happy.
So I'll just kick in on that a little bit. You know, our experience in Georgetown is that the planning commission and the county commission, folks that actually make a lot of land use decisions, have no idea what sustainability is. I think is or that that's how what they do might interact with those things.
Right.
Although Coastal Carolina's done a pretty good job working on the political, the policy implications of sustainability with the county, which has been helpful, so they at least know what sustainability is. And so a tool like this, you know, could potentially be useful for folks on the planning commission, except they would need to know that it was there and how to use it, right? And so the next step actually might be not so much the general social media TikTok thing, though I'm sure that doesn't hurt, but it might be a little more targeted at the people that really are making the decisions on the ground. But it probably has to take a step back because a lot of those folks don't have any science background in the first place. So there's a bit of a learning curve, unless they happen to be fishermen. So.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, it's a tough nut to crack, no doubt about it.
We'll do that end with stirring passion in science and stuff, you know, targeting and having education in the younger ages and more opportunities in high schools and middle schools and stuff like that. So the NRGSA, the National Resources Graduate Student Association here, we're doing an outreach event for a high school on Monday, and it's pretty involved, and we're gonna have all, you know, lecture fishing backpacks and people from all sorts of different disciplines, birds, insects, you know, herps, all that stuff. So that's something that event's trying to do as well, stir up that passion and
Absolutely.
educate people at a younger age.
Yeah, and so that's a big concern of ours is user friendliness. It's huge. And so you can't be too technical, you'll scare away, you know, the vast majority of any lay person. So we're thinking about, you know, not TikTok, but like a YouTube video of like have somebody walking through how to do each of these things. Like, and then you click on that, and then you'll get this, and you know, it's just a little tutorial or several. And helping people out with just the technical aspect. And then also like actual outreach where you go to a place like you're talking about the planning commission and say, look, this is a thing, you know, this is how this works. This can inform decision-making that you're trying to do that actually will keep your environment healthy and your quality of life intact. I mean, if you use those terms, I think, right, because we are seeing ecosystem services be impacted. And people don't want to see, you know, trashy anything, right? They want it to look nice and be beautiful. South Carolina is a beautiful place. It's like, this will keep it that way.
Yeah, just to go off your point, just to add a little optimism, I guess, when we were first starting this project, I presented at the, you know, the State Wildlife or Water Resources Conference. You might be familiar with on this. And I think what I've learned is that we're pretty fortunate, at least in the upstate, we have quite a few groups that are really passionate about land conservation in terms of wildlife diversity and fish diversity. And I got some pretty positive comments on this tool as far as like, it's gonna help them. They think it's gonna help them generate fundraising support, like from their own constituent groups, which might then help, you know, push the needle in that direction. So it was cool to see that there's folks, you know, that are eagerly awaiting this. But yeah, that's a good point that we gotta reach out to those, probably do more outreach events, workshops for like county folks, like the people who are actually doing a lot of this stuff, but yeah.